Everyone says feedback is essential. Companies want it, leaders ask for it, employees say they're open to it. But somehow, feedback still feels awkward, confusing, or even risky at work. On this episode of the Super IO Bros, we're breaking down what feedback actually is, why it so often misses the mark, and what separates feedback that creates growth from feedback that creates stress. We'll talk about why clarity matters more than honesty alone, how workplace culture shapes whether feedback feels safe or threatening, and what feedback looks like when it actually gives someone enough certainty to take action. Because feedback isn't about calling people out, it's about helping people level up. Let's get into it.
So, question number one: when we're talking about feedback in the workplace, what are we actually referring to? And how certain are people about what feedback is meant to do?
Well, I mean, I think at its core, feedback is information meant to help someone adjust behavior in service of a goal. But in many workplaces, people are deeply uncertain about what feedback is. For like, what is it for? 6 7. And that uncertainty fuels conflict avoidance, in my opinion.
Mhm.
When organizations can't clearly define feedback as developmental rather than evaluative, I think it's a very important thing. Do you have anything on this, John?
Yeah, so I feel like the primary goal of feedback in the workplace is to help individuals identify areas of work in which there's room for improvement, whether it be building upon a skill they already have, bridging a gap where there might be one, or helping an individual develop an entirely new skill. However, I feel there's a discrepancy in what feedback means in the workplace. What I mean by this is, like, for instance, some people might view feedback similarly to like how I do and how, like, you were mentioning it. And it's like more of a growth aspect to
Yeah.
help somebody level up, like you mentioned. Whereas I feel like a lot of other people view feedback as more of like reactionary, reacting in the instant to what happened to just like have a quick fix. And I feel like when they go with that mindset, there's not much room for growth. It's more like a hot patch. Just like, I don't know if you've ever seen those videos, like the flex tape videos,
Oh
when there's a
yeah, yeah,
hole in the
yeah.
boat and like, oh, we just got to figure this out right now. So they just patch it up and they move on to the next step. But when you just do that quick fix, that hot patch, it doesn't like really give somebody room for growth. They know what it is that like to avoid it next time, but they might not know exactly how to like replicate it, or they didn't really grow from it. They just had an issue like fixed for them in the instance. So that could like easily slip your mind in the future if you weren't walked through, given that feedback on why you need to go about this way to, avoid this happening again. So just that greater understanding that you get from feedback. Um,
I feel like what you're trying to allude there, it's kind of like what I mentioned a little bit ago, evaluative.
yes, yes,
It's almost,
exactly.
in the essence, it's like a checkpoint, as you
Mhm.
were saying. It's almost like a task
Mhm.
that giving feedback to somebody. It's just checked off your list. I just
Checkbox.
talked to somebody. I told them everything they did wrong, or I just did what I had to do for company's sake. It almost doesn't take a personal approach.
Yeah, they're not looking at like big picture. It's more like micro.
Yeah,
So they're just fixing it in the instance. They're not looking at the growth for the person.
it,
It's
it, it,
just
a lot of it is they just focus on gaps of a person,
mhm.
just what they're doing wrong, and like you said, it's not future focused, so they don't really think about what can you do for the future. Instead of like thinking about it in a positive sense, it's like it's almost how you say it. It's like, let's say you keep tying your shoes but you keep double knotting, so you have trouble when you take off your shoes. Let's say you slip them off and you try to put them back on, you try to untie them, and that takes you a lot of time. So let's say you get late to work every day for it. Yeah, it's a crazy shoelace, huh? But with that said, the manager might be like, okay, maybe we should stop double knotting it.
Let's get some
And
sketchers.
yeah, maybe get some sketches, maybe get some Velcro.
Some
I don't know, a little
straps.
strap, or we just do a single knot. Like it kind of like going forward, we should probably try to do this instead of like stop trying your shoes double knotted. That doesn't really give you a
Exactly.
fix. It just kind of like tells you, okay, this is what you have to do.
Especially if that's the only thing that the person knows how to do. Then what are they gonna do? Nothing.
Exactly. Yeah,
I'm just
some
not gonna
people
wear shoes.
only knows how to double knot, triple knot.
Going
Like
barefoot. Going barefoot.
because maybe they don't like how long the laces get when they
Exactly.
do a single knot. But
Mhm.
that's how it goes.
Yeah, it somewhat reminds me of like a lot of jobs in retail, like Target, Walmart, where feedback is not really guided. It's more just on the spot and very like vague.
Mm.
Like the way they give feedback would be something like, "Oh, you need to go faster," or "You did something wrong," but they don't really explain what it is that really went wrong.
Mhm.
Mm.
And so the employee is just left kind of guessing, and then and then when the employee does happen to do something good, they never get
They're not
commented on
praised
it. Yeah,
for
they're
it,
not
yeah.
praised, they're not told good job, nothing. So
Mhm.
they're just left guessing constantly.
Yeah, it's like a guessing game, like pin the tail on the donkey, sort of thing. But I feel like that's almost more on the organization for like
Yeah.
leadership issues. But that's a
Yeah,
story for
Yeah.
another
It's
day.
culture.
So in hindsight, I just feel like feedback just in those senses it just becomes emotionally charged, not
Yeah.
because it's harsh, but because the purpose is
Reactionary.
unclear,
Yeah.
which goes into our next question. Why does some feedback feel unclear or unhelpful? While other feedback leads to learning and change, how does certainty influence that difference? Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier conflict avoidance. Now, what I have here is feedback feels unhelpful when people are focused to interpret intent instead of focusing on the action. Now, going back to conflict avoidance, for those that do not know, in the workplace, it's the tendency to delay, soften, or completely avoid addressing issues, disagreements, or feedback in order to prevent discomfort, tension, or negative reactions, even when addressing issues for like healthier in the long run, like you were saying, instead of like just a band-aid, let's talk about it. Instead of just here's an email, you kept doing this wrong last week. That's
Mhm.
it. um, but here's a good example I have here. It's a manager notices an employee consistently misses deadlines, but doesn't address it directly. To avoid any uncomfortable conversation, months later, frustration builds from the said manager, and the feedback comes out abruptly during a performance review. The employee feels blindsided and the trust is damaged. Early, clear, low stakes feedback would have reduced anxiety and supported the improvement. More so, just check ins. So like not like informal check-ins via email, or maybe it's like, hey, I've been seeing you've been missing the deadlines, is something going on, how can I accommodate this, let's work on time management, maybe here are some recommendations, instead of just holding it in, getting frustrated, because at the end of the day it might be the employee that is missing the deadlines, but it's your job to make sure they feel safe and they're guided
Mhm.
in their journey to complete their deadlines.
Mhm.
It's not just only when performance reviews, they need to understand what they're getting into, how they're performing even before the performance reviews.
Mhm.
I think that's a good way of looking at feedback in that sense. And if you think about it in the gym, now, imagine a gym trainer notices your form is off. I think I've said this example before, but doesn't correct you to avoid making you uncomfortable. You keep lifting incorrectly and eventually get injured. The avoidance didn't protect you, it delayed your learning.
Mhm.
What
It's
do
a
you guys got?
hindrance. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree that there has to be intent behind the feedback. Like you can't just say like you're just doing this wrong. Like there has to be more behind it. There has to be like meaning for that growth to like ensue. If not, nothing's gonna come of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like giving feedback, like it should still be done on the spot sometimes instead of just holding it back.
But I feel like
Yeah.
situation based.
Yeah, it's based on situation.
You can't just give feedback to somebody when you're in a team meeting.
Yeah.
Because they might feel like they're targeted or they're being blindsided,
Yeah.
depending on how the situation is or how maybe it's something that's out of the control of the employee and the manager doesn't even know.
I think you can. It just depends on like the level of trust within the organization. But that kind of goes into what we have later, like with the culture and everything. Because like the in the moment feedback can be greater than like delaying it. I feel like, and it's just it depends on the culture really. Because like if it's like accepted, like my boss will tell me on the spot if like there's something that I need to work on. But it's okay because we all know it's just for like the betterment, and it's not to put anybody down. But I
Now,
definitely think
but-
it's situational. Because if it's a different workspace, of course not.
now let's say you're in a meeting, you have other bosses there, and he just tells
Oh,
you,
yeah,
"Hey,
now-
John."
Yeah.
Yeah, not in that instance.
Exactly.
It depends
You
on
gotta
like the
pick.
level of trust within the room and just like because
And
during like our monthly meetings just within HR, like
Yeah.
there's a high level of like trust. Everybody's bouncing like criticizing like thoughts, but like constructively.
Yeah.
We're all working towards a common goal. In the end, we're all working for the same company. So like nobody's competing against one another. So there's just that level of trust. I understand if like I'm in a meeting with my CEO and then another CEO, and if I mess up, if I get called out, I'll definitely feel some type of way about it
Yeah.
because it's like a different type of room, it's a different type of setting. So yeah, it's situational, but I feel like it also boils down to like the level of trust and the culture within the organization as well. Like it's a big factor in
Oh,
that
100%.
being possible.
Yeah. How much is feedback seen as a positive thing,
Mhm.
and how much is it seen as a negative thing?
What I see it as almost is like when you got something stuck in your teeth, and like you don't want to be seen as somebody with something stuck in your teeth, but nobody wants to bring it up to the guy like in the middle of it. But if you tell me there's something stuck in your teeth, bro, like
I got a
clean
worse
your
one for
teeth.
you, buddy. I got a worse one for you.
What, tissue paper on your foot?
No deodorant. Smelly
Ah,
kits.
Exactly.
Who wants to be that person that they say, "Hey,
Nobody. But
did you wear deodorant?"
exactly, you got to be something.
But how do you be a proactive friend? You just say, "Hey, buddy, give me a
Just take-
second. No. Here's some Axe."
We're back in middle school.
Yeah.
Middle school.
The Axe body spray.
But like, I feel like that kind of is a good example of it. Like nobody wants to be that guy, but sometimes being that guy is better than letting things slide, like you mentioned. And like it's very situational based. You're gonna say that?
I was gonna say that if you just bring it up, like the feedback, it could end up feeling like a punishment depending on when you do it, and then the employee doesn't really take anything out of it. They'll just
Mhm.
think that
Somebody's out
Oh.
to get them.
yeah, it's like this is like a punishment, like they just did something wrong. They won't really like some employees won't really think about the next steps or what they should do next. They'll just think, oh, I messed up.
Yeah. I also feel like. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, as we were saying, it's situation based, and it's also culture.
Mhm.
It plays a big deal to it because if you do not have a good culture, and let's say you have a good rapport with your manager, it could easily be damaged
Mhm.
by just one single phrase of feedback if it's in a negative tone or a positive one.
Mhm.
It's like, do you feel blindsided? That's a big thing because when you get like low certainty in the feedback that you're getting, how specific is this? Because it's not just
The intent
about
behind it.
when the feedback is coming.
Mhm.
It's about how it's being delivered, but also what is being said. As we said, how specific is that said feedback to somebody? Because with low certainty, it could cause anxiety and therefore avoidance. Maybe that person is having an issue with their deadlines because of a software issue, but they won't come to you for it, even though you know how to go to the tech support and figure it out and help them with the process. They probably won't go to you because you have been giving them very negative feedback, or you kind of don't relate to them what they should be doing properly.
Mm.
You don't have that environment with them. It could lead to longer deadlines, or a task that could have been done in maybe an hour with tech support could take maybe 2 days. because maybe the manager knows a connection in tech support. Because I know tech support's probably always busy, almost. There's technology everywhere nowadays. Whereas high certainty builds it can build confidence. It builds experimentation for creativity in the workplace, and improvement. And I know you've been doing a lot of creative projects in your workplace, John.
Mhm.
And can you talk about how like your boss has been encouraging that?
Yeah, so I mean that's been a thing since day one. Feedback has been definitely like very important. We've been having like periodic checkups in meetings along the way to make sure that I'm aligned with like my tasks, but as well as everything that I've been creating on my own aligned with the bigger picture of my role. So, like you mentioned, I've been creating a lot of projects, and those are just all self-driven. I create the idea, and similarly to like how we were talking about in the last episode when we were talking about curiosity, the idea just kind of pops up, and I just work on it on my own, and I essentially come with a finished product. And so that happens every 2 weeks. We have a meeting, and we go over everything that it is that I'm covering, and I get the feedback there live. He gets his like first interpretation of everything it is that I'm doing, and he gives me his immediate feedback, his immediate thoughts on how I can improve. I have a lot to talk about that on number 4, so I'm going to save a little bit of it.
Yeah, that's fine. You can
But
save it.
so we'll save a little bit more for later. But that's kind of how it's been. The periodic meetings, and I always go in with a sense of security because I know that anything that I'm going to hear back from my boss is purely like for my improvement and my betterment. And I think that's what it boils down to, kind of like what you were talking about with the low certainty and high certainty, like how I mentioned the intent. Like it's very important the intent behind the feedback. Are you just giving someone feedback to tell them they did something wrong? Because that's going to lead to that low certainty, that low trust. Like, oh, they're just out to tell me off, like
Yeah.
that you messed up.
Yeah.
Or are you coming with the intent to help me? Are you actually here to aid me? Like, are you here to do your job essentially? Like, I'm here to do my job. You're here to help me grow and help me succeed for the company, blah, blah, blah. Like, what's the intent behind the feedback?
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch a little bit on feedback that leads to learning and change. So I feel like,
Before there, I just
Okay.
wanted to end my thought
okay, go for it.
with essentially everything we've been talking about. The outcome that I say about certainty, I believe certainty transforms feedback from a personal risk into a shared problem solving tool.
Mhm.
Like you were talking about, there's problem solving in your meetings
Mhm.
where everybody gives each other feedback. It's not just the manager that gives feedback or your boss. It's your coworkers, whether you're a senior at a position or you're just entry level, or mid level. Everybody can give feedback, and that's the important part to remember in an organization. That's a good organization should be able to have feedback that just goes around, not just it's one way.
Exactly. To create that teamwork,
Exactly.
avoid groupthink, diversity. Yeah. But I feel like feedback that leads to learning and change, in order for that to occur, like it has to be actionable, it has to be objective in order for it to like successfully be replicated in the future. The employee receiving the feedback to successfully replicate it in the future. And in order for that to occur, I feel like a manager has to illustrate their thoughts clearly in ways that guide the employee to that desired outcome. Kind of like how we mentioned checkpoints and just like a roadmap of a sense to like kind of show them step by step how to get there. Like kind of like if you're going through a video game, you have to go do this quest first and then do that quest to get to the outcome. And I feel like there has to be room for a two-way street, like how we were mentioning in the team meetings and the dialogue, to ensure that the employee not only do they have that roadmap to success, but they have an understanding. Like there has to be points where the manager can tell the employee, like, "Are you understanding this? Did you get this part?" To give them a chance to speak up for that feedback to like truly be, meaningful and impactful, so that they have a greater understanding of it to actually lead to that change and that learning experience. Because I could lecture somebody, like you lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink,
No.
so to speak. Like
Yeah.
I could tell you everything. I could give you a 10-minute TED talk on how to do the best pull up, but I guarantee you, you're just gonna go up there and do that pull up, and I know he's gonna mess it up. So like, I really need to make sure that he understands this is not a personal shot.
But
it's true.
but it's can't, but it goes with the roadmap
Exactly.
approach. He maybe can't do as many pull-ups as you can do right now, maybe 10. But there's exercises you can do besides the pull-ups that prepare you
Mhm.
to do more pull-ups
Mhm.
by doing them.
We've tried. You got anything else, buddy?
I think in regards to the feedback itself,
He's up to
That-
6, by the way. 6 pull-ups.
7
7.
yesterday.
Almost there.
But I think that as long as the feedback itself is like to make it clear, as long as it follows these 3 things, it basically helps the person understand what happened,
Mhm.
why it matters, and what to do next, like the next steps. Then that would be like successful feedback. If it's missing, I think any of those 3, then it might just
too vague.
too vague,
Mhm.
too confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
buy-in is important.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's important to see why is this important for me? Why is this gonna help me grow?
Mm-hmm. So they have a better understanding.
Well, and that moves us to question number 3. Yusuf, how does an organization's feedback culture shape how comfortable and certain people feel when giving and receiving feedback? Talked about this a little
So I think that feedback needs to, for the most part, be somewhat predictable, because sometimes, like we were talking about, like feedback on the spot, it might feel, if it's not done correctly, or the culture just isn't like built around that, like it's not something that the employees are used to, then it might cause some anxiety or confusion. But if it's more predictable, like let's say a performance review or a once a week check-in, then the employee can expect it and be prepared for it ahead of time, kind of.
Mm. But most of the time, feedback is not just so cut and dry. That would mean they know exactly what the feedback is on. Like sometimes it's feedback can be something that an employee doesn't see himself, but the manager does see.
I feel like what he was trying to mention with the consistency there is kind of like what I was mentioning earlier. Like, I know I have my 2-week meetings every 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
But you don't know what's going to be mentioned, and that's true. Like, it's not predictable. But the consistency that I've been shown since the beginning with these 2-week meetings is that the purpose for them is solely for my growth. It's not to critique me in any. It's to critique me, but it's not to critique me in a negative way. So the consistency in having those 2 meetings, every month, is solely for my benefit. So I know going into it, no matter what, I'm gonna walk out either knowing more or being secured in like the route that I've been going is correct. So I'm getting that like positive reinforcement, or I'm getting something that I can build upon. Like I'm getting the negative feedback, but it's solely intended for my growth. So going into it, I can like go into it my guard down. Like I have that extra added security, that comfort in knowing, this is for my betterment.
Which goes back to the conversation of what's more valuable, in the moment feedback or scheduled feedback.
I think it's
It
all.
depends.
I don't think it depends. I think both of them have their pros and their cons.
Yeah, I feel like minor feedback maybe in the moment, like a little tweak. It's like, hey, I've noticed that you've been missing, or you've been coming in late. Like, what's going on?
Mhm.
I think that's like feedback that doesn't need to be in a scheduled
Scheduled.
meeting with a team, maybe per se.
Unless it's persistent.
Unless maybe you have like I would say like individual meetings. If you have individual meetings, I guess yeah, you can do the schedule. But if it's team meetings that is scheduled for the creative purposes of it's creative feedback, everybody's getting a say. It's not just because your boss can give you feedback on something, and you could explain to him, I don't think this is gonna work, and you give him feedback based on what you know.
Mhm.
And it goes both ways.
Mhm.
So I feel like more in the moment feedback tends to be not as complex per se most of the time. Maybe just like a little tweak.
I think why I think you need both of them is because like as a whole, it just adds like it creates that level of
Oh,
trust.
they're both needed.
Yeah, like the consistency, like in knowing that like I'll get it in person, like how we were talking about like something stuck in your teeth, like and the scheduled ones, the planned ones where I can anticipate it. Like I think it creates just a greater sense of clarity and knowing they're always looking out for me in the best way.
Yeah, and it builds trust.
Exactly,
I
it
feel
builds
like
trust.
it builds more organizational commitment to
Mm.
that person.
Like a
You know,
teamwork,
yeah.
actual team.
So it's imagine you're an athlete and you're on a team. Everybody's doing their thing. I'm let's say we're swimmers. Everybody's swimming. Everybody's competing. You only got 4 spots in a relay, um, but everybody's on the same team.
Mhm.
So when you compete for your team.
Mhm.
You know, but the you only got 4 spots. That's for the best people. But you coach comes to you not just in team meetings, because team meetings everybody gets a little something. They get a little tweak. But he comes to you personally. He's like, "Hey, I've been noticing you've been dragging a little bit. Maybe lift up your hips a bit more, and you'll get a better pull. So and less resistance in the water. So that might make you feel like, wow, coach really believes in me, and it might make you feel better rapport for your coach and then for your boss. It's like, okay, he sees me going somewhere.
Mhm.
He sees something in me, and that in turn is going to give me more motivation to give my all.
Mhm.
That's how I kind of look at it.
I agree completely.
Yeah, I don't think the people really fear the feedback itself. That it really depends on what feedback means in that organization, because it all really depends on the organization itself. Because employees can like they pay attention to what happens after the feedback is given, and so sometimes it could mean something bad or it could mean something good, just growth in general.
Mhm.
Yeah, but you can't tell somebody you're doing something wrong, but not tell them
Yeah, guide them.
how they're doing it wrong and what's the next steps you should do forward.
Mhm.
As a leader, your guidance to somebody else, whether you've experienced it before or not. You know, you have to be the example.
But like in something like, let's say, an accounting job, if you make some mistakes and they give feedback on it, it could mean something really bad. Even if the feedback is constructive,
What do you mean?
if you make like a huge error, it could lead like
Like,
like
like
an
what? You're
accountant,
like a
like that you're
freelance
working with
accountant.
with the numbers.
You're a
No,
freelance
not a freelance,
accountant.
like in a bank,
You know,
and you
well,
make an
they
error
have
and it has to do with
managers,
numbers.
but they also have managers too.
You make an error. I mean, the feedback you get could like
Well, it's just the feedback you just walk through the process. I would feel like that'd be the most efficient way. It's like, okay, let's figure out where this error was made. Let's go through this process. Show me how you did it. And then from there they will guide you to making the right correction.
Yeah, but that's just feedback. I think what you're like, I think you're getting stuck up on like the magnitude of the mess up.
yeah.
Just because it's like inherently
No,
like larger or
that's-
whatever doesn't mean that the feedback necessarily changes. Like there still have to
But
be given the feedback.
That
in an
can change
appropriate
like
manner.
the meaning of the feedback in that organization. Because if you mess up in different organizations, the feedback could be lighter, or you won't really fear the feedback.
I understand like the
But
concept that you're trying to say, but I think it really just depends on like the severity of what it
Yeah.
is that
Yeah,
you've done.
but
Like, have we broken laws here? 'Cause-
most of those accounting errors though, the employee doesn't know they made the error. If not, they would probably fix it. It's later on
Mhm.
they find out there was an error and they go back
There's
to
room to
the
correct
employee and then they kind of talk it through.
yeah,
Yeah.
I understand what you're trying to say though. But
Yeah.
I think that comes down to that's something entirely different.
I think it comes down to the organization and like what rules do they have set in place, what expectations do they have of the employee.
Mhm.
And it's like, you always get strikes at a company. You don't want to hit all the strikes, but
Mhm.
you can.
Yeah, that involves like what feedback could mean in the organization. Because if feedback are like strikes, then the employee is gonna fear the feedback itself because they're aware like, oh, this is basically a strike one.
What if an organization is only giving feedback for strikes? I think that's not a very good organization.
Yeah, I think we're hung up on like a wrong idea.
Yeah.
We're going down the bad path.
Yeah,
Just
buddy.
keep going.
That's very conflict. That's not conflict avoidance.
Yeah,
That's-
yeah.
We're talking about trust, Yusuf.
Yeah.
No, we're not talking about antitrust here. Trust grows when feedback is consistently leads to learning, not punishment. Come on.
Mhm.
But which kind of like we go into, we've talked about uncertainty, we've talked about trust. Let's talk about the next topic. What does feedback look like when it provides enough clarity and certainty for someone to take action? And where do organizations tend to fall short? Actual feedback reduces conflict by removing ambiguity. As we were saying a little bit before. Now, I know you've had something to say about this, John, with your boss. Let's
Yes.
talk about it.
Okay. So I feel like what my boss does like a really good job in like avoiding falling short is he's not in his feedback, he's never prescribing me something. Like it's not a prescription. I'm not going to a doctor and he's telling me do this, this, and this, and you'll get better here. He's very much like he's giving me like the recipe for success. He's giving me points of which I can continue to grow upon. Like it's not always so this is the way kind of thing. Like he's not the Mandalorian, right? Like we're not being forced down this, one certain path. He's giving me his interpretation of how I can improve on a certain task, on a certain area, but he's also leaving it up to me, open a little bit where I can continue to grow, maybe even beyond what it is that he has. Views, like whatever he is, like he can see in that moment. For
Yeah.
instance, like when you were bringing up earlier, how like I could mention something to him. I had a similar instance literally this week where we were reviewing all the projects that I had come up with, and he saw a vision for one of my projects that could go in a different avenue. And while his vision could work, I thought that it would maybe be like a greater impact to the organization if we could separate those ideas. I could create something based on his vision that he wanted, which was similar to mine, while still maintaining like the vision that I had for this other project. There were similarities, but like we came to the conclusion that
They were different.
they were different and it would be better off keeping them separated. But if he would have just came out and told me, yeah, we're going to take this and we're going to put it like over here, like we're taking your idea and we're going to turn it into this, it just wouldn't have been as effective as if we tweaked his idea that he had. Like he was trying to make a tweak on mine and I made a tweak on his, and we like came up to a better picture, for
Yeah.
instance.
Worth the deal.
Essentially, yeah, like we mentioned earlier, like the two-way street kind of thing. Like there has to be room for growth for even both of us.
Yeah, when feedback is good, it builds trust. When trust is built, it builds conversation.
Exactly. And if, without that trust, I definitely wouldn't have been like, hey, maybe we can.
I don't like that idea, buddy.
Exactly.
Let's do the two-parter.
If you look at it, that's essentially what I said, but that's like somebody else could have been rubbed off the wrong way by me speaking up to a superior in a sense and telling him, I don't think that's a good idea, we should do this. But since we have that level of trust from the consistency, from all the meetings we've had, from the understandings we've had, he knows, first of all, I knew that he wasn't disrespecting my idea. And he knew that I wasn't disrespecting his idea because we have that
I
level
agree.
of trust. We have that level of understanding to know that we're both in it for our organization. And we're doing this for the betterment of our organization.
Yeah.
So just that level of trust and that level of certainty is like huge when it comes to feedback.
Yeah, where it's more like feedback that enables action is specific, timely, behavior focused, and goal oriented. It clearly identifies what happened, why it matters, and what to do next.
Mhm.
Most importantly, it leaves receivers knowing exactly how to improve. You know, an organization tends to fall short when it's too vague.
Mhm.
It avoids the discomfort of telling somebody you might be doing something wrong, or it's like, hey, I've been noticing you have this idea, John, but maybe we should do this.
Mhm.
Instead of, if he never had this conversation with you, maybe he would have just thought about it. You might have never created two out
Mhm.
of the same idea, two projects,
Mhm.
and that is going to help the company vastly in the future. You know, without clarity and certainty, even well-intended feedback falls to translate to change.
Mhm.
An example would be, instead of saying your communication needs work, actionable feedback sounds like, in client meetings, your insight comes late. Sharing them earlier would help guide the conversation. Now, obviously, the tone matters.
Yeah.
You don't want to end the environment. You don't want to say this in front of everybody. You kind of want to be like, hey, look, next time I'm noticing when you're talking to clients, you give your insights a little bit too late, and it's kind of a little bit off topic. Their mind is already going to the next topic, and they probably feel like, because you're sharing, that you're not guiding the conversation. Instead, it's their job to guide the conversation, but it's your job to guide the ideas, to guide a path for our clients.
Mhm.
you know just redirecting, showing him what the goals of the organization is. What's the mission, what's the vision. And a good feedback should remind somebody about what's the vision, what's the mission, because if you don't know where you're going, you
Are
might
you gonna
even
get?
just plateau. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you don't know where you're going, you don't know what you're walking towards, who you're walking for,
Mhm.
mostly yourself. But it's just everybody's always learning everything different about yourself. In life, there's a saying that says you only stop learning when you're dead.
Mhm.
So every day is a new learning experience, whether it's you saw a bird fly and land on a pole that might have been like close to your house, but then the next morning you saw it across the street land on the pole. So now you're like, oh, so he doesn't like that photo. Maybe he took care of his business. He pooped on my car and that's it. He's on to the next one. This guy's an
Bigger and bigger
adventurous
things.
bird.
Yeah.
So, you can examine things every day in life.
Mhm.
What do you think about that, Yusuf?
I think that bird's a little weird, but I think that, what is it called? But yeah, but feedback, like, it doesn't have to be like soft how it's given. Like, it doesn't have to be
No.
how the person gives it is like, oh, like they just like they speak softly and try to be nice to the person. It
Yeah,
just has to be that, like, it's usable,
I agree.
and as long as it's clear, it allows people to really learn instead of just have it in their mind what it is they need to do next.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads to an example where, during like a structured interview, that I think we all made structured interviews,
Yeah.
that
I don't remember.
you don't remember.
We did. We
At
did make
school.
structure interviews.
That we include those feedback comment boxes.
Yeah. I mean, but
Trying
normally
to,
those
like,
are
yeah,
anchored
and
with behavioral
yeah, they're
scales.
tied to be like observable behaviors,
Yeah.
and they have scoring criteria. Like, you don't really have to kind of guess what the intent behind it is. You could read what it is and understand it and observe it and learn what they should do next and what worked, essentially.
Mm.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. So when certainty is high, it gives the people giving the feedback. It, no, what I was trying to say is, when the certainty is high, it gives the receivers a better form of feedback. Not only that, they're able to act faster after the feedback, understand the feedback, and therefore conflict decreases rather than escalates. Learning in compound. It's like, oh, I saw you were doing this task. Let's see if we can put these two tasks together and make it into one project. You know, it compounds your learning and it helps you move faster, act faster. Most feedback problems aren't honesty problems, they're certainty problems. And when certainty is missing, conflict avoidance fills the gap most of the time.
Mhm.
And it's not a you don't want to be nice all the time. You want to just be lenient, and you not lenient, my bad. You want to be just upfront,
Mhm.
open,
Yeah.
just like with your boss.
Yeah, I think the more like the only word that just keeps popping back into my head that like I didn't have in my notes, but once we started talking is just intent. I think it all boils down to intent and like being intentional in your purpose for the feedback. I think it all kind of just I hate to say it's that simple, but like I feel like the more we've talked about it, everything like slowly revolves around intent and coming back to that.
Yeah.
That's all I can think of when you guys are talking. Like we keep talking about certainty. Like certainty comes back to intent, and like in knowing that they're giving me this feedback for growth, and that's like what successful feedback is. And I think organizations fall short because honestly, most of the time, the intent behind the feedback isn't a good one. Like it's reactionary, like how we mentioned earlier. It's a hot fix, and because that just boils down to leadership in organizations training leaders to be successful leaders.
Yeah.
So they don't have the skill set to give the intent and give the meaningful change to the employees. But that's why I feel like my boss is so good at what he does, is because he's been in the organization for years, and like our organization is huge on training, and so like these leaders are ready to succeed when they become leaders. Like they have the guidelines already, like
Now,
to give that meaningful change, give that meaningful feedback.
now we've been talking a lot about leaders,
Mhm.
but do you feel that feedback is a one-way street, or you feel that that person has to be open to the feedback? I mean, there's factors like the culture, as we said, and
Mhm.
stuff. But is there some people that are less prone to accepting feedback, more of maybe an ego thing, or maybe they're just not high on the coachability standard?
I think it goes back to like what I mentioned a little bit ago, like how I said you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Everybody got
And
different needs.
and in that sense, that horse is like a two-way street almost. Like my boss can lead me to water, but like I can't drink. Like I lost my train of thought. But
I get it.
you get what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say? Like I have to be just as willing to receive this feedback and implement it as he has to be just as willing to give me effective feedback and lead me to that,
Now,
to the water, the figurative water.
now, is it the leader's job, or the boss? Is it the giver of the feedback's job to tailor said feedback to somebody that might be more opposed to feedback? Figure out ways,
Yeah,
or
because
is it
they're the leader.
solely on them?
Yeah, it's the leader. I think it all comes back to the organization and like ensuring that leaders are propped up to succeed to give this feedback. But I mean, I think it does depend on the leader. But
Now, what do you do? Keep giving somebody feedback and they don't do it.
well, I mean, like how we mentioned the strikes and
Yeah.
stuff, it comes to a point. Like you can only do so much for a person if they just refuse. And the whole purpose of the feedback, I'm assuming the feedback is being given for the success of the organization and stuff. Like if there's just a player who wants to be a ball hog, unless you're Kobe Bryant,
They're a taker.
yeah, I mean, unless you're Kobe Bryant, like it's just not going to cut it in like these teamwork organizational settings. I mean, there's definitely jobs that it can cut it, like maybe sales or something like that. But if you're going off the rails, like Yusuf was mentioning earlier, and like making unethical decisions, maybe like that set the company at a risk in like a different setting, like you're gonna get feedback on there. Maybe you might be pretty brash and like brazen in like the way that you do your work, and it's still successful, so you won't get feedback there, but maybe you're messing up somewhere else, kind of thing. So like,
Are we assuming the feedback is being tailored? Since you're saying that they don't take the feedback, they refuse it, are we assuming it's being tailored each time?
Yeah, like in the sense of what Adam Grant's framework is of the givers and takers, where the givers often avoid giving feedback because they don't want to hurt relationships or create discomfort, but takers may interpret feedback as a threat or a power move. So it's like they already come into it with a mindset. Maybe previous job had a horrible feedback system. Maybe it was kind of like you were saying. You said it was a strike system. It was insane. It was you get in there, you get the bully. Like it's not too good.
I guess in that sense, it comes down to the organization.
How open is the person to talk about that struggle? I think as well. And I think it does fall on the leader to realize that struggle of that employee
Mhm.
or the discomfort
Mhm.
and kind of go through the motion of it because you know it, mostly companies they want to create a culture and sometimes they hire people that might fit their culture.
Yeah.
So rarely would you have said employee that wouldn't
Makes
fit
it
the
through.
culture, but
Yeah.
if it does, maybe it can help the company grow, but you have to tailor the culture to said person in a sense. I would say in terms of feedback,
Mhm.
because you want them to accept the culture or you want them to be able to work with the culture,
Mhm.
while still keeping their identity. They could be whoever they want to be, but just they have to be able to just understand and rationalize with the culture. Maybe if it's a feedback heavy culture, Um, I know we've had a classmate before that he did not like the feedback happy go lucky culture at his job that he worked at Google.
Mm.
But I know somebody that does like that culture and thrives in that culture. And he felt like it was a hassle because of all the checkups weekly. He felt like he wanted to be more independent, more autonomy. But the sense in that situation is just kind of breaks it down as like how much are you willing to bend for one individual if you have set rules and regulations for team meetings, and one person wants to be more autonomous. That kind of goes with it depends.
Yeah. It always comes
It
back to it depends.
depends. So if there's one thing to take away from this episode, it's this. Most workplaces don't struggle with feedback because people don't care. They struggle because people are unsure, uncomfortable, and trying to avoid conflict. Conflict avoidance feels like protection in the moment, but over time creates confusion, missed growth, and broken trust. Feedback works when it's clear, timely, and grounded in shared goals. When people know the intent isn't to criticize, but to help each other get better. So, whether you're giving feedback, receiving it, or building a culture around it, the question isn't how do I avoid conflict? It's how do I create enough clarity and trust that conflict turns into progress. There's That's where real growth happens. Thank you for listening to Super IO Bros. If this episode if this episode resonated, share it with someone who's navigated feedback before, at work, or leading them through it. We'll catch you in the next time.
Bye.
In the next